On April 14, 2022, somewhere in the Black Sea, Russia's most famous warship was dying. The Moskva, flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, had spent decades as a symbol of Soviet and then Russian naval power, a cruiser built during the Cold War to threaten American aircraft carriers and later used by Moscow to project strength from Georgia to Syria to Ukraine. It carried heavy anti-ship missiles, long-range air defenses, radar systems, guns, hundreds of sailors, and the prestige of a navy that still wanted the world to see Russia as a great maritime power. But now, the ship was burning, damaged so badly that its crew had been evacuated and tugboats were trying to pull it back toward port. Russian officials said an onboard fire had caused ammunition to explode. Ukraine said its Neptune missiles had found the ship in the dark and struck it off the coast. Whatever final minutes played out aboard the cruiser, the result was impossible to hide. The flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet slipped beneath the water, and one of the most powerful ships in the region became the biggest naval disaster of the Ukraine war. The Moskva had not begun life as an ordinary ship. It was born from the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was trying to challenge the United States not only on land, in space, and through nuclear weapons, but across the oceans. American aircraft carriers were floating air bases, able to move near crisis zones and project power far from home. The Soviet Union did not try to match the United States carrier for carrier. Instead, Soviet naval planners built ships designed to kill them. The cruiser that would later become Moskva was laid down in 1976 in Mykolaiv, a major shipbuilding city that was then part of the Soviet Union and is now in Ukraine. Its first name was Slava, meaning glory, and the name matched the kind of image the Soviet Navy wanted the ship to carry. The Slava-class cruisers were designed around missile power. Their most visible feature was the row of enormous launch tubes mounted along the sides of the hull, built to fire heavy anti-ship missiles over long distances. To anyone looking at the ship from a distance, it did not have the sleek, hidden profile of a modern stealth vessel. Its weapons were exposed, obvious, and almost theatrical, with missile tubes, radar arrays, gun mounts, and air defense systems rising from the deck like a warning. The message was simple. This ship had been built to strike hard before the enemy could get close. When Slava entered service in the 1980s, the Soviet Union still looked like a permanent superpower. Its navy operated from the Arctic to the Mediterranean, shadowing NATO fleets and representing Soviet strength wherever Moscow wanted to show its flag. The cruiser became one of the important vessels in that world, and in 1989, it gained international attention when it hosted part of the Malta summit between Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and American President George H.W. Bush. At that moment, Slava belonged to a navy that still carried the weight of a global rivalry. Then, the Soviet Union collapsed. The collapse did not only change flags, governments, and borders. It wrecked the military system that had built ships like Slava. Funding vanished. Maintenance suffered. Naval programs were delayed, cancelled, or abandoned. Ships that had once represented Soviet ambition became too expensive to repair properly. Slava entered the 1990s in a kind of limbo, caught between old Soviet prestige and the financial weakness of post-Soviet Russia. The ship sat for years, while Russia struggled to keep parts of its navy alive, and when it finally returned to service in 2000, it came back under a new name, Moskva, named after Russia's capital. That name mattered. Moskva was no longer only a warship, it was a floating symbol of the Russian state itself. As Vladimir Putin began rebuilding the image of Russian power, the cruiser became one of the most visible ships in the Black Sea Fleet. It appeared during the 2008 war with Georgia, later served in the Mediterranean during Russia's intervention in Syria, and after Turkey shot down a Russian warplane in 2015, Moskva was deployed near Syria as a sign that Russia would defend its forces more aggressively. The ship was old, but it still looked dangerous. It still carried heavy missiles. It still served as a command platform. And in the Black Sea, it remained one of the most recognizable symbols of Russian naval dominance. But age was always part of the story. Moskva had been designed in the 1970s for a different world, one where Soviet planners imagined large naval battles against NATO carrier groups and expected power to come from massed missile fire, heavy radar, and large crews operating complex systems by hand. Modern warfare was changing around it. Drones, coastal missiles, satellite tracking, electronic warfare, and smaller precision weapons were giving weaker navies and coastal defenders new ways to threaten ships that once seemed untouchable. Moskva was powerful, but it was also a Cold War machine, trying to survive in a war where the coastline itself could become a hidden weapon. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Moskva became part of the opening pressure on Ukraine's southern coast. Russia had a much stronger navy than Ukraine, and the Black Sea Fleet was expected to help isolate Ukraine from the sea, threaten Odessa, support operations near the coast, and show that Moscow controlled the waters around southern Ukraine. Ukraine's navy had been badly weakened for years, especially after Russia's seizure of Crimea in 2014. And when the invasion began, it did not appear to have the kind of fleet that could challenge Russia in a direct naval battle. On paper, the balance looked one-sided. That made Moskva's first famous moment of the invasion even more important. On the first day of the war, Russian forces moved against Snake Island, a tiny rocky outpost in the northwestern Black Sea. The island was small, but its position near shipping routes and the approaches to Odessa gave it symbolic and strategic value. Russian ships, including Moskva, demanded that the Ukrainian border guards stationed there surrender. The reply became one of the most famous phrases of the war, a blunt refusal directed at the Russian warship itself. Russia captured the island, but the exchange spread across the world and turned Snake Island into a symbol of Ukrainian defiance. That moment also attached Moskva's name to the emotional story of the invasion. The ship was no longer just a cruiser in Russia's fleet. It had become the Russian warship, in the phrase Ukrainians used to express resistance against a larger invading power. The ship that was supposed to help intimidate Ukraine became part of the language Ukraine used to mock and defy Russia. That irony would become much heavier less than 2 months later, when the same warship became the target of Ukraine's most important naval strike. By April 2022, Russia's land campaign had already met far more resistance than Moscow expected. Kyiv had not fallen quickly. Ukrainian forces were still fighting. Western weapons were arriving. Russian units were taking heavy losses. But at sea, Russia still seemed to hold the stronger position. Moskva operated off Ukraine's southern coast, helping support Russia's blockade and providing air defense coverage for other vessels. Its presence mattered because a flagship is never just a collection of weapons. It is a command center, a morale symbol, and a sign of confidence. As long as Moskva stayed on station, Russia could still project the image that its fleet controlled the Black Sea. Ukraine was looking for a way to break that image. The weapon that changed the story was the Neptune anti-ship missile, a Ukrainian-developed coastal missile system designed to strike ships at sea. Against a smaller patrol boat, a missile strike would have been serious. Against Moskva, it was historic. A cruiser that had been designed to hunt major enemy warships was now being threatened by missiles fired from land by a country that Russia believed had little chance of challenging it at sea. The entire scene reversed the old logic of naval power. Ukraine did not need a bigger fleet. It needed to find the flagship, target it, and strike before the ship could defend itself. On April 13th, Ukrainian officials said they had done exactly that. According to Ukraine, 2 Neptune missiles were launched toward Moskva, while the cruiser was operating in the Black Sea. The missiles were sea-skimming weapons, designed to fly low over the water and reduce the time a ship had to detect and respond. Later analysis suggested that Moskva may not have been ready for the attack and may not have had key radar systems operating in the right way at the critical moment. There were also reports that Ukrainian drones may have helped distract or locate the ship, though some details remain disputed. What mattered most was that the cruiser, despite its size and weapons, failed to stop the incoming strike. The first hours after the attack were filled with confusion. Ukraine announced that Moskva had been hit by missiles. Russia gave a different account, saying a fire had broken out on board and caused ammunition to explode. Russian officials acknowledged serious damage, but did not immediately describe the event as a Ukrainian success. That disagreement became part of the drama because the loss was not only military, it was political and symbolic. For Ukraine, the strike showed that Russia's Black Sea power could be challenged. For Russia, admitting that its flagship had been hit by Ukrainian missiles would mean admitting that a ship built to survive modern naval war had failed in one of the most public ways possible. Aboard the ship, the emergency was the kind sailors fear most. A warship is packed with fuel, ammunition, electrical systems, machinery, enclosed compartments, and weapons that can become deadly if fire spreads out of control. Damage control teams train for exactly that nightmare, because in naval combat, the first strike is often only the beginning. The real battle is whether the crew can keep the ship alive after the explosion. On Moskva, the damage appears to have overwhelmed that fight. Fire spread through the cruiser. Ammunition may have detonated. Power and communications were likely disrupted. Smoke and flames turned a symbol of command into a trapped steel structure fighting for survival. The crew was evacuated, and Russia attempted to tow the damaged cruiser back toward port. For a short time, there was still a chance the ship might survive as a crippled wreck, damaged but not lost. Navies have saved badly wounded ships before. If Moskva could be brought back to Sevastopol, Russia might still control the story, repair what it could, and avoid the full humiliation of losing the flagship. But the Black Sea did not give them that chance. As the ship was being towed, flooding worsened. Stability failed. The cruiser that had once been built to threaten carrier groups could no longer keep itself above water. Then, Moskva sank. The loss sent shockwaves far beyond the Black Sea. Russia had not lost merely a vessel. It had lost the flagship of the fleet, assigned to dominate Ukraine's coastline. It had lost a ship named after its capital. It had lost one of the most visible symbols of its naval strength in a war where symbols already mattered deeply. For Ukraine, the sinking became a victory that reached far beyond the physical damage. The same warship mocked at Snake Island was now on the seabed. A country that was supposed to be weaker at sea had just delivered one of the most embarrassing blows Russia had suffered in the opening months of the war. The human cost was harder to measure. Russia's official statements about the crew changed over time, and the true number of sailors killed or missing became a sensitive issue. Families searched for answers. Some relatives of crew members challenged official silence and demanded to know what had happened to their sons. The uncertainty mattered because the story of Moskva was not only about steel, missiles, and strategy. Hundreds of men had been aboard a ship that was burning and sinking in the dark, and the political need to control the narrative made their fate part of the wider information war. The sinking also exposed a larger truth about modern naval warfare. Big ships can still matter, but they can no longer assume that size, prestige, or heavy weapons make them safe. Coastal missiles, drones, surveillance, and intelligence can turn the shoreline into a threat zone. A navy that controls the surface of the sea can still be vulnerable if it underestimates a defender operating from land. Moskva had been built for a world of large fleet engagements, but Ukraine found a way to strike it in a war shaped by mobility, precision, and the ability of a smaller force to exploit a single failure. For Russia's Black Sea Fleet, the loss changed the way the war at sea was understood. Russia still had ships, missiles, submarines, aircraft, and bases. It did not lose the Black Sea in one night, but it lost the confidence that came with assuming its major warships could operate near Ukraine without serious risk. Over time, Ukrainian attacks with missiles and naval drones would continue to pressure Russian ships and bases, forcing the Black Sea Fleet to adapt and operate more cautiously. Moskva became the first great warning that the sea around Ukraine was not a safe Russian lake. For Ukraine, the sinking became one of the clearest examples of how the war could be fought asymmetrically. Ukraine did not need to match Russia ship for ship. It could use land-based missiles, drones, intelligence, and patience to make Russia pay for bringing expensive assets within range. That lesson mattered because much of the war followed the same pattern. Russia often had more equipment and larger forces, but Ukraine searched for weak points, symbols, and moments where a precise strike could produce an effect larger than the weapon itself. That is why the sinking of Moskva became more than a naval incident. It was a story about reputation collapsing in public. Before the war, the cruiser represented old Soviet engineering, Russian military prestige, and the belief that Moscow could dominate the Black Sea. During the invasion, it became linked to Snake Island and the first defiant phrase of Ukrainian resistance. Then, in April, it became proof that even the most visible symbol of Russian power could be struck, burned, and lost. The ship's journey from Cold War glory to wartime humiliation made the disaster feel almost scripted, except the consequences were real. The biggest naval disaster of the Ukraine war did not end the conflict. It did not destroy Russia's navy, and it did not remove the threat to Ukraine's coastline. But it changed the story of the Black Sea. A fleet that had entered the war expecting dominance lost its flagship to a country it had tried to blockade. A warship named for Russia's capital disappeared beneath the water after being tied forever to one of Ukraine's most famous acts of defiance. And a conflict that many expected Russia to control quickly revealed that even a powerful military can be shocked when it underestimates the enemy in front of it. Moskva's wreck still rests beneath the Black Sea as a symbol of that mistake. It began as Slava, Glory, a Soviet cruiser built for the ambitions of a superpower. It became Moskva, a Russian flagship meant to show that Moscow's naval strength had survived the collapse of the Soviet Union. Then it entered the Ukraine war as a command ship, a threat, and a symbol of intimidation. Less than 2 months later, it was gone. The ship that had once represented Russian power became the clearest proof that power could fail. And in the waters off Ukraine, the pride of the Black Sea Fleet became the disaster Russia could not explain away. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more history content covering wars, revolutions, and events that shaped the modern world.